As I'm sure you well know, the Great Depression was a hard time for consumers. The prices of food were significantly increasing, making it harder for consumers to pick and choose what they were going to eat each day. The price of food had gone up by 30%. To put this into perspective, a can of chips during the 1920s was about $1. By the time you get to the Great Depression, a can of chips was averaging out at about $1.29. This might not seem like a significant increase to people today, but at the time, it had a great impact. Because the prices of food were going up, companies were also losing out on customers. And of course, because there were less products being sold, factories required less workers, which in turn put many people out of their jobs. Food advertisers felt that the only way they would be able to come back from this was to put out as much advertising as possible. The more advertisements they put out, the more likely people were to buy their products. At the time, food advertisers had a great advantage over other advertisers because food was an essential product during the 1930s. Because the prices of food were increasing, food advertisers were tasked with making their products seem more desirable and worth their consumers' money. For example, this is shown here in the King Midas flour advertisement. They know their product is more expensive, so they advertise that their flour is worth the cost. They want their consumers to believe that their flour is of better quality than others. Another example of this is shown in the Nabisco company. Nabisco Ritz crackers were advertised as making food look more expensive because they are of good quality crackers, and everyone would love them. Similarly, the Royal Baking Powder Company would advertise that their product would be more reliable, which is why it is worth the money. As seen here in this ad, a woman claims to be able to feed her big family on just $9 a week. She claims that Royal Baking Powder is so reliable that she would never switch brands. This leads consumers to believe that Royal Baking Powder would supposedly never fail them, so they are more likely to pick this brand over others. During the Great Depression, advertisers catered their ads towards women because they were seen as the primary food makers in the household. Many advertisers urged women, through their ads, to continue cooking homemade meals as opposed to ready-made foods. This would ensure that women are more likely to use their products to make their food versus something that is already made for them and takes less ingredients. Advertising also gave tips to women about eating more healthy foods and how their product would help their husband in growing children. For example, advertisers suggested food that had vitamins in them. In this ad from the Great Depression, you can see that liver loaf is supposed to be rich in vitamin B. Had the advertisers not said that there was vitamin B in liver loaf, it would have seemed less appetizing to their consumers. Advertisers also tried to promote bananas during the Great Depression. To promote bananas during the Great Depression, the United Fruit Company featured children who cried out that they needed their nourishment through bananas. So, of course, mothers felt it was necessary to provide their kids with healthy bananas. Advertisers also started to feature more Italian foods, such as pasta, saying it would keep families healthy. They also made sure to note it was less expensive than other foods. In this picture, Heinz is advertising their spaghetti that comes with meat inside. They pay particular attention to the low cost of the meat so that the consumers believe that they are getting a good deal. Moving forward, cereal was just starting to be produced, so advertisements for cereal became very popular. Cereal advertisers would cater their advertisements more towards children because they had a great influence on their parents' product choices. Children were more likely to convince their parents to buy food rather than to buy a new toy. Because there wasn't much distinction between cereals at the time, cereal advertisers needed to come up with ways to create loyal customers. Cereal advertisers would promote clubs that kids could join by buying products and turning in box tops. An example of one of these clubs are the General Mills Skippy Secret Service Society, or Skippy Club for short. This club allowed for children to be more interactive with the brand. For example, General Mills provided its members with a badge as well as an eating chart to track their breakfasts each day. Cereal advertisers similarly created radio clubs that children could be a part of and listen to each day. The advertisers had to come up with a way to make sure most children would be able to hear their shows, so in order to do this, they purposefully aired their radio shows during after-school hours. Cereal companies would also advertise free toys inside the cereal boxes to make children want them even more. Parents were just required to buy a box of cereal to get the free toy, but of course this isn't free because they had to buy the box of cereal. All these clubs that the cereal advertisers made were just a way for them to create branded customers. In the end, advertisers used many tactics to convince consumers during the Great Depression to buy their products with what little money they had.
During the Great Depression, many Americans suffered from food insecurity. A major sector of these suffering Americans were school children who often lacked nutritional, filling meals during the day. Before the Depression, school lunches were not required to be implemented in schools. If students were provided lunch, it was usually through a volunteer basis from those within the school or the local community. As the Depression worsened, however, the desire for children to have access to nutritious meals became more important than ever. It is interesting to note that school lunch efforts did not arise in the United States. The school lunch movement first emerged in Europe in the late 19th century. Great Britain and Germany implemented the most extensive feeding programs under centralized oversight from national governments. Taking a cue from these early European efforts, experimentation with school lunch in the United States began during the Progressive Era. Religious institutions, charities, and professional women's groups, including the Women's Educational and Industrial Union and the Women's School Alliance, launched the first free milk and lunch programs to combat pervasive childhood malnutrition in the growing urban centers of the Northeast and Midwest. However, the South seemed to struggle the most with implementing these school lunch programs, Georgia specifically. These states were extremely rural, with most farms struggling during this time. Due to this impoverishment, these states could not afford to keep the school lunch programs running. The Great Depression ultimately reignited interest in school lunches for children. Some of the first efforts to re-implement school lunches were actually in DeKalb County, Georgia. Social activist Francis Pauley worked with public health professionals to create a hot lunch program in the county schools. As the decade continued, support for school lunches soared. Congress, as well as the president himself, noticed this support, and as part of the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, a sector based on school lunches was created, called the Nutritional Lunch Program. It was used not only to make sure young children had access to healthy food, but it also provided jobs that would help boost the economy during this time. How would this school lunch program work, though? President Roosevelt, along with the help of the federal government and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, came up with a clever way to implement these programs. During this time, the government sought to help struggling farms by providing supplemental income. However, consumer demand was extremely low, which resulted in a surplus of commodities. To solve this issue, the U.S. Department of Agriculture worked with the Federal Surplus Commodities Corporation, purchasing these surplus commodities such as pork, dairy products, and wheat. These surplus products would then be made available to school children who could not afford to pay for lunches and needed nutritional food. Through this arrangement, schools would be provided with the necessary food needed to support these programs, and struggling farms were able to regain their footing and begin making a living again. In addition to school children, the Nutritional Lunch Program also aided struggling families. U.S. participation during this time ultimately reshaped federal support for school lunch programs. However, as food and labor costs began to rise, these forced cuts in lunch service. Concerned about a national epidemic of malnutrition, which compromised the health of military troops as well as civilian workers and children, Congress authorized funds in 1943 to create the Community School Lunch Program, in which local schools received limited federal funding to provide food and school nutritionists. Other costs, such as building cafeterias and maintaining a professional food service staff, were not covered. Because there was no guarantee that the government would continue financially supporting these aspects, this left many communities uneasy about the future of their community's school lunch programs. On top of this, local oversight for participating communities was often lax and did not always adhere to federal standards for equitable distribution of food regardless of students' race or socioeconomic status. The seeds of discrimination were still very much at play during this time, and many African American communities were not awarded the proper funding or support that other communities were receiving. Many legislators in the South were extremely discriminatory in terms of which communities deserved the most support for school lunches. In an attempt to debunk these continuing Jim Crow ideologies, Congressman Adam Clayton Powell Jr. proposed an amendment that would deny federal funds to any state or school system that practiced racial discrimination in its operation of the lunch program. This amendment was passed by Congress, but Powell admitted that this would not fully end segregation or discrimination within the school lunch program. Both houses of Congress finally passed the National School Lunch Act after careful redrafting, and with support from the aging New Deal political coalition, a fragile alliance between the liberal and conservative wings of the Democratic Party. The stated dual goals of the program were to safeguard the health and well-being of the nation's children and to encourage the domestic consumption of nutritional agricultural commodities. U.S. President Harry Truman signed the act into law on June 4, 1946.
Immigration has played such a huge role in the development of the United States of America. From before 1776, when the U.S. fought England for its independence, to the present day, it has played such a role in so much economically, politically, culturally, and even culinary. One of the biggest time periods food played a part in was the Great Depression, a time where starvation and pestilence ravaged the lives of many a man. Through this economic travesty, however, the soul of culinary arts still lived on. People just had to get creative to get by in this time period, and this even meant having to mesh with other cultures, which the U.S. citizens were not fond of. Many immigrants were led to believe that they were coming to a land of opportunity, but instead all they received was suffering, struggle, and discrimination. From before, during, and even after the Great Depression, U.S. citizens looked down on anyone who wasn't like them. The Europeans, the Asians, Hispanics, and Africans were looked at as inferior to their North American brethren. And during the Great Depression, though, we needed the help of these people way more than ever, because we were starving. Through restaurants, soup kitchens, or just even getting together, immigrants spread their culture through food. This mishmash gave birth to our favorites like Taco Bell, pizza chains, and even Chinese buffets. It's not just food that these people spread, though. Their techniques, such as using woks or flambeing, were introduced to Americans, and even spices we have never seen before came over here during this time period. In the Dust Bowl, we couldn't even grow food. The land was barren, pests ravaged anything that managed to grow, and dust storms terrorized families. Prepackaged foods would be needed, such as canned meats, which included fish caught from the coasts of Japan, hot dogs, which used to be called frankfurters because of their Germanic origin, and Italian food, popular in New York because of their vast Italian population. People would get some of these Italian sandwiches on their way to work because it was portable and it filled them up. Pizza was also a viable option because it fed families and it was cheap, because a full pizza can feed at least 4 people. California had an Asian population, making foods using homemade noodles a very viable food option, and French baguettes were a portable and aerodynamic form of bread. Recipes were found during this time period to capitalize just how hard it was to survive here. Water pie, potato pancakes, and poor man's meal were just some of the recipes that we found, and they were so cheap and so, well, disgusting, to say the least. But it's just how the population got by. New ways of using flour were even introduced to fill people up. Pastas, noodles, tortillas, and even more were just, some things that we were introduced to. And these ideas even spread further to the school cafeterias, our markets, food drives, and even more. Soon, these ideas spread throughout the U.S. Even with all these amazing breakthroughs, though, immigrants were still treated less than human by the U.S. citizens. Violent acts of racism and threats of death or deportation struck fear into the hearts of foreigners. But alas, those who came here persevered and made the culinary America we know today. Americans' 5-star restaurants were made possible because of this time period. The opportunity to spread culture and learn new culinary ideas sparked a revolution in culinary America. Today, everybody eats meals that were influenced by the immigrants of this time period, whether we know this or not. Our pan of pizza, our French bread, our hard-shell tacos, our hamburgers, and just so much more of these products influenced our country. Immigration influenced all of this. People coming here for opportunity only to be met with absolute travesty persevered, and they influenced what we have today.
Hi,
Hello.
we're that one group.
Yes, we are.
We're going to be attempting to make Great Depression food.
Yeah.
So,
We're going to be making water pie, poor man's meal, and potato pancakes. So, hope you enjoy. All right. So the first thing we're making, well, actually Michael's making it.
is water pie.
Yes.
And right now he is putting together the crust. So now Michael is unraveling the pie crust and putting it into the pie tin. And now he has to tuck in those corners to make sure that none of the water escapes from the sides. There we go. And now he is ready to put the water into it.
So you're gonna pour your water into a cup. Like the poor people back then would do.
Yeah.
You're gonna pour your first cup of water into your water pie.
Good job.
You're gonna get a half cup of water and pour it into your water pie. If you put too much water in it, it will be watery. So try not to go over that amount. Next, we need to mix flour and sugar, and then sprinkle it over the water. We need 4 tablespoons of all-purpose flour and 1 cup of sugar.
Perfect.
You said 1 cup of sugar.
Yes,
Where did that? Is that that?
1/2 cup of sugar.
And then
So
here's a tablespoon.
I'll just pour it onto this plate.
All right. Here's the thing on the plate. Wipe it off.
So 4 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our poor man's flour container. This looks really fancy for somebody who's poor. And 1 tablespoon. 2 tablespoons.
Maybe you want to level it off so it's easier.
It would actually be a lot easier.
That's the best measuring.
4 tablespoons. All right, and next we're going to get 1 cup of sugar. This is a lot of sugar.
It's just to mix it in a small bowl. Okay.
So we're gonna open our Great Value brand sugar.
Yeah.
So during this time, do y'all feel like sugar was something that was kind of rare for families to have during this time? Like, do y'all feel like it would be more expensive than flour, or?
So, from what I've read at the time, sugar was very hard for people to get it. So, they had to do a lot of substituting. But this recipe would have been something that
For the upper class
yeah, the
people
upper class
who
would
were
have made.
still impacted by the Depression.
Gotcha.
Because of course milk was very scarce. Especially
Yeah.
canned milk, it was very expensive, so they had to come up with alternatives. So of course usually a pie might include milk, but this one does not.
So this version was probably one that was made by some of the poorer
Just use your
families.
hands. Did you wash your hands?
Yes.
Okay, just use your hands. It's worth it. Oh my god, the butter.
Let's do it evenly. So, you are not supposed to stir this, as according to the recipe.
Yeah.
So, you just gotta just pour this in, evenly distribute it. Like so. We are almost there. And voila, we have a very nice water pie filling so far. And next, we are going to pour the vanilla extract and the tablespoons of butter.
How much vanilla?
We need 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract and 5 tablespoons of butter cut into 5 pieces.
Oh, Michael.
This stuff is actually really nice. Okay, so here's your butter.
Thank you.
And then you need teaspoons.
I need, yes, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract.
Do y'all also feel like butter was hard for poor families to get
A
as
little
well?
bit. I mean, some
Yeah.
of them would use butter on toast, but it was still not a lot of people that could get butter.
Exactly.
I feel like vanilla extract was also like a commodity to
Oh,
have
yeah.
during that time.
And I mean, like, desserts in general, even though they were poor, they still wanted to make desserts. So you'd have things like a Great Depression cake, which would be chocolate, and it would be dairy-free and egg-free. So, of course, that's going to be a little hard to make, but they actually came out tasting pretty good.
We
That
have
looks
our
exactly like the photo.
vanilla, and we have our butter, which will go on top of this.
Yeah, just like in little.
In
Make like a
littles.
domino, you know, like the 5.
That sounds like a very good idea, if they will stay still.
This is crazy.
And plop. That is great. And there's only one thing left to do. That is to plop this baby into the oven for 30 minutes.
Perfect.
And then pop it in for another 30 minutes at 375. Shred them potatoes.
Yes.
Now give us the Great Depression facts.
So, probably also during this time, I'm not sure what access families had to cooking tools. So, when they went to shred potatoes, they more than likely had to do it by hand, which would be an extremely time-consuming task. So, but yeah, this is the second step in our potato pancakes. After we peel them, we're going to shred them, and yeah.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Now we are back at Emily making our potato pancakes into a pancake shape.
Yes. So after we shredded the 3 potatoes, we just added 1 egg and half a teaspoon of baking powder. We mix it together, and then now all we have to do is just form these into little pancake shapes. So
You can do any size that you like. We'll probably do like silver dollar size pancakes.
All right, and now we are about to flip our pancakes. Look at that golden brown. Oh yeah. She's just gonna continue flipping as they become ready to be flipped. And right now, let's go. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Now look at these pancakes right here. Perfectly golden brown and crispy.
Absolutely.
And we got some even crispier ones on the way. Yeah. Here is Catherine peeling our potatoes for the poor man's meal. And here's Catherine shredding potatoes as well. Care to give us a Great Depression fact?
Potatoes were very abundant in families. They were a lot cheaper than most products. So they would literally try to make so many recipes of potato because they're very good in vitamins or proteins and all that stuff that they would need.
Alright.
Yeah. We're also going to be adding hot dogs later on. The hot dogs are one of the more cheap meats that people could afford. They could really only use beef and hot dogs. Anything like chicken, pork, that was very expensive.
Funny how that flip-flopped in today's world.
I know.
And here she is, dicing her potatoes.
Yeah. The poor man's meal.
Very poor man's meal. Alright, and here we are chopping our onion for the poor man's meal.
Feeling it. My eyes
And
are
peeling it.
tear.
Aren't they always teary? I'm joking. Alright, yeah. And right now we are attempting to open the tomato sauce because we forgot a can opener, but that's okay. People back then probably didn't have the can openers. Poor people didn't have a lot. Alright, right now we are chopping up the hot dogs, commonly known, or not commonly known now, but used to be called Frankfurters, because these are a German staple. But due to the discrimination against the German folk during World War I, companies were forced to change the name of their product to hot dog instead. Alright, and right now we are getting ready to finish our poor man's meal.
I'm waiting for the pan to heat up.
We are waiting for our pan to heat up so we can add our extra virgin olive oil. And then we will add our potatoes and onions, followed by our sauce and our hot dogs and water. And now we are preparing to cook our meal. Right now we are going to be adding some olive oil.
Like a tablespoon.
That is a tablespoon of olive oil. You are correct, I think.
Pretty sure. Okay.
While we have that spread, we're going to add our potatoes and our onions. There we go, a nice heaping helping of potatoes.
These are all very cheap things that they could buy at the time, hence the name Poor Man's Meal.
Yes. You're adding some onions, white onions to be exact. Any onion will do, but our preferred onion is the white onion. Alright, and we're gonna allow that to saute.
So it's nice and brown.
Yeah, until it's
And once it's brown, we're gonna add in our hot dogs.
yeah. Alright folks, right now we are almost done browning. Look at that beautiful golden color of these potatoes and onions. And now we are adding our hot dogs to our golden brown potatoes and onions.
And we're also going to be adding 2 tablespoons of tomato sauce.
Yeah.
Yummy.
Tomato sauce.
Now, because we forgot our can opener, we used a knife to open this, and it's really hard to pour.
Understandable.
Am I supposed to add the water as well?
Stir it and then add the water, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. No, don't grab it. I wanted to grab the pan, but I knew if I did that I'd burn my fingers. So now we've put the water into the pan and it is in there to help soften up the potatoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These potatoes look like they're getting really soft
Well, that's just
eventually.
This looks very interesting.
Yeah, this looks really poor. Here we are with the finished product. While it looks really good, I can assure you that it smells like a barn.
Yeah. And I tried a little bit of it and it kind of feels like it could take some salt and pepper. But I guess this is how they made it with what they had.
They probably didn't have seasonings, they were poor.
Yeah.
Alright, and now we are about to try this delicious meal that we have put together.
So,
Catherine?
upon smelling the potato pancake, it smells like dog food. So, I'm gonna try it.
Does it taste like dog food? Yeah. And the final part of our creation, the water pie. Completed. It has been chilled for, at the very least, an hour. And as you can see, it is very gelatinous. Very wiggly, if you will.